Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Gyan Bhakti. We are currently exploring the scripture Mysticism of Srimad Bhagavatam. Commentary is by my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayananda ji Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we will discuss the mystical meaning of the destruction of Sudarshan, the terrible python, the story we discussed yesterday. So this story has an interesting mystical implication. In the process of attaining enlightenment, the idea that I am the body is a great obstacle. It's called dehadhyas. This misconception is so deep rooted that even when one attained heights of samadhi, now and then that idea will still assert itself. Samadhi is super consciousness state. So even with that, when we come back, since we reside in this body, we often confuse and we think we are this body. Dehadhyas is due to viparita buddhi or perverted vision. We are never the body. The body is merely our tool. However, due to ignorance, we identify ourselves with our body. It as if becomes our identity, but that is misguided. Being obsessed with our physical body is an obstacle on the spiritual path. We should keep our body healthy, clean, and pleasant looking, but we should not be deluded by it. Free of the body idea, we are like an eagle flying in the sky, swooping down the earth when necessary, catching its prey and then flying off again into the expanse of the sky. Dragged down by dehadhyas, we become just like a crawling snake to be eaten up by the eagles. We become tied to a world of time and space, feeding on vanity. We cannot experience the joy of soaring in spiritual expansion. Our mind is always involved in past, present, future, with the body and its relationships. So dragging itself in a miserable way through the world of time and space, that python created by Dehadhyas tries to catch hold of Nanda. Nanda means joy, Anand. The python tries to swallow up all the joy we have within our heart. But by the grace-filled touch of Krishna, we are able to negate the body idea and all the illusion and vanities that are related to it. The moment we develop love of God and our body becomes a vehicle for the devotional movement, we are no longer a python. Deep within us, there opens a window to eternity. Our soul soars in timeless, spaceless expansion. So that is this episode. Moving on to the episode of destruction of Shankhachud. One beautiful night, Krishna and Balrama were with the gopis in the forest of Vrindavana. The sky was full of shining stars and the gentle light of the moon was flooding the earth. The fragrance of jasmine and other flowers was permeating the atmosphere. The breeze was blowing sweetly, carrying the fragrance to the bees who were humming as they moved from flower to flower. Krishna began to play on his flute and all were singing with great delight. At that time, a demon called Shankhachud, who was one of the attendants of Kuber, the god of treasure, came and tried to kidnap all the gopis. By his supernormal power, he drove them like animals and caused them to start crying. When Krishna and Balrama saw what was happening, they ran to the rescue. Seeing the two brothers chasing him like two aspects of death, Shankhachud was terrified. He left the gopis alone and ran for his life. However, Krishna and Balrama caught him and thrashed him to death. Victoriously, Krishna removed a special gem that the demon had on his head and gave it to his brother. The mystical meaning, Shankhachud represents another mystical obstacle, love of wealth. When we are experiencing the heights of spiritual consciousness, One obstacle that comes to haunt us is dehadhyas, identification with this body, and that is represented by the python Sudarshana, as we just learned. Another obstacle that comes is love of wealth, symbolized by Shankhachuda. The moment love for material wealth arises, all divine sentiments, the gopis are as if it were kidnapped. However, if the spiritual movement continues, if one presses on with intensive sadhana, spiritual discipline, then the grace of Krishna and Balarama within will rush to restore those divine sentiments. Krishna represents the divine self and Balarama is purified will. With this help, we destroy Shankhachura. After the death of Shankhachud, Krishna removes the rare jewel from his head and gives it to Balarama, his elder brother. In other words, that rare jewel of contentment now decks the will aspect of your personality, and one is no longer harboring the desire for worldly values. Our will is directed to the highest attainment of life, which is mukti, nirvana, self realization. In this human body, it is the only worthwhile cause that we should be devoting to. In simpler terms, two obstacles are to be overcome in order that the gopis or divine sentiments within us may flourish: the vanity of looks and the vanity of wealth. When they flourish, there is a perpetual rasa leela, the mystic dance within our heart. So we should make sure that we don't identify too much with the body, money, worldly values. We should be looking for divine values, spiritual values. And once that rasa or nectar starts flowing, that is more intense, more satisfying than all the worldly values combined. So that is the essence of this episode. Moving on to the next one, destruction of Arishtasur, the gigantic ox. So there were many leelas that Lord Krishna and Balram did. Mainly Lord Krishna, because he is the avatar of Lord Vishnu, and Balramji is the Sheshnag, the serpent that gives the couch to Lord Vishnu to sit upon. And in Ramayana, Lakshman was the younger brother, Sheshnag, and Sankarshan also we call in Bhagavatam. And then of course Lord Rama was Lord Vishnu. So many incarnations continually happen, and one that will happen in the future is Kalki avatar, they say, when Lord will emerge again to rid the world of its impurities. So anyway, going to this episode of the gigantic ox. One evening when Shri Krishna and the cowherd boys were returning to Vraj from the forest, they encountered Arishtasura, a demon appearing in the form of a wild gigantic ox. He was so huge that the hump on his back was like a mountain and the clouds began to perch on it. When he became trampled upon the earth with his hooves, the very earth began to tremble. Such a big ox. When the gopis and gopas saw this very personification of fury and terror, they all became afraid and cried out to Krishna for help. He quietened their fears and immediately challenged that demon to a fight. As Arishtasur rushed forward, his uplifted tail seemed to scatter the clouds in the sky. With a terrible speed, that demon pounced upon Krishna, intending to tear the divine boy apart with his horns. However, Krishna caught hold of the horns of Arishtasura with both his hands and pushed that demon away. Although exhausted by the impact of Krishna's power, the demon charged again. This time, Krishna destroyed Arishtasur, drawing out the awesome horns from his head. Immediately, gods from heaven began to rejoice at the destruction of that terrible demon, and they showered flowers upon Krishna. So we will study this mystic implication in tomorrow's satsang. This is Swami Nikhilanand. Om Tat Sat.